Welcome to the final edition of Wine and Word. This evening we have a special treat. Reverend Carrie Ballenger, who is the pastor of the English-speaking congregation at the Lutheran Church of the Redeemer in the Old City of Jerusalem, was with us for an interview. After listening to her interview, if you have questions you would like to ask her, please email them to Pastor Woolner or myself. We will forward them to Reverend Ballenger and ask her to record her answers via video. Because of the time change, we don't want her to have to get up at 2 in the morning more often than is necessary. She has, however, agreed to be part of our final panel on October 27th, where we will bring back Bishop Christ, we'll bring back Pastor Enquist, and we'll have Pastor Ballenger all together on the screen for a panel conversation about what it's like to be women in ministry. Well, the Reverend Carrie Ballenger is a graduate of the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago. But that's not the only credential she brings to this particular work of being a pastor. She's also a trained doula and studied to be a midwife at one point in her life. In addition, she's a music teacher, and I know her to be a very fine musician. I met Pastor Ballenger in the summer of 2017 when I had a fellowship to be at the Albright Institute for Archaeological Research, which is in East Jerusalem. I not only visited the Church of the Redeemer for the month that I was in Jerusalem, but I also had the opportunity to sit down with Pastor Ballenger and talk a little bit about her context and to understand a little more about life in Jerusalem and to actually just connect as women pastors in ministry. Pastor Ballenger's interview gives us a whole different context in which to think about issues of women in ministry, issues of justice in the city, and issues of how we go about with our nearest neighbors. Come join me. It's a delightful interview, and I look forward to the panel discussion on October 27th. Yeah, so Reverend Carrie Ballenger is the pastor at Redeemer Lutheran Church in the Old City of Jerusalem. She's the pastor of the English-speaking congregation, which, are you affiliated with the ELCA or the ELJHL?
That's a great question. Actually, I am a pastor of the ELCA, but our ministry is a global missions ministry of the ELCA and a congregation of the ELCJHL. So what that means is that I'm here by invitation of the local church. I'm sent, but while I'm here, my bishop is the local bishop, who is Bishop Ibrahim Azar of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. So the answer is both. I'm pastor of both churches.
Are you all totally online?
Yeah, we were online from March 12th until end of May, and then we did like 5 or 6 weeks in person, and then we were online again, and then we did in person for a few more weeks, and now we're shut down. But also, I mean, I've continued to do online sermons the whole time because people seem to appreciate it, and I mean, a lot of our community left. They, you know, the people who were normally here, they left, and they want to remain connected to Jerusalem. So even when we opened back up in end of August, I said, well, I'm going to continue to do both. So I just record. We don't do like Zoom live. We do, because we don't have internet in the chapel. You've seen our.
Yeah. I can't even imagine putting internet in that chapel.
No. I mean, we don't even have a microphone or air conditioning, so we we don't have Wi-Fi. But so I just record here at home, and then I preach in person. But yeah,
that's
right now
complicated.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So tell me a little bit about how you got to Redeemer. So first of all, how does your call story unfold? How do you get to be a pastor? And then how does your journey as a pastor take you to Redeemer in Jerusalem?
Well, first of all, I should say that I'm considered a second career pastor, and I might even consider myself a third career pastor because first I was a music teacher, and I'm a third generation music teacher, actually. My grandparents and my parents and my aunts and uncles all are music teachers in the public schools in the US. And I didn't think about doing anything but that. So I became a piano major, and I really loved it. But I remember that I would go to my piano lessons, and my teacher, who was great, would say to me, you didn't practice enough this week, Carrie. And I would say, yeah, I know, but there was this Habitat for Humanity build going on this weekend, and I had to go build a house. And she would say, well, that's great, but you really should have been practicing piano. And I think that was the point where I started to think, as much as I love music and it's a part of who I am, maybe I'm not cut out to just do that. I think that I knew that I wanted to do something else, and to be working in another way in the world. So I first went to seminary in 1998, after teaching music for a little while. And then I had a baby in my first semester of seminary, and then quickly had another baby. And I found that it was really hard, obviously, to be in graduate school, and I was teaching piano, and I was being a mom, and I realized I wasn't enjoying any of it. And I said to myself, well, I have a choice, and my kids are only going to be babies once. So I chose to spend that part of my life really focusing on my children, and I don't regret it. A lot of people said things to me at that time like, that's not a very feminist move. And I felt that it was, because I felt like I was making a choice that was right for me at the time and right for my kids. So I stayed home with my children for a time in my life. And during that time, I became a doula, which is a person who accompanies women through the birthing experience, and was studying to be a midwife. And so it wasn't, and then I did that for some years, and it wasn't until, 2005 that I went back to seminary, and I was only ordained in 2009. And I graduated from Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, and then I had my first call in a rural congregation in Illinois, and my second call was as senior pastor at a large suburban congregation, and Jerusalem is my third call. I came here in 2014.
Okay, that was my next question, was how long you'd been in Jerusalem. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, well, I'm in my 7th year, which feels in one way like a really long time, because a lot of expats here only stay 2 years or so. But on the other hand, it's Jerusalem, I don't know. It feels like a long time and also a short time, because like history is long in this place.
Well, so I know that you weren't the first woman to be called to the Church of the Redeemer. As far as I remember, you're the first solo woman to be called as pastor there.
As far as I know, that's true too. Just prior to me, Martin and Angela Zimmern were here, and they are both pastors, and so they served together in this call. So you're right, there have been several women before me, but I'm the first, as far as I know, I'm the first solo pastor to serve in this call.
Yeah, and what has that been like?
Well, I mean, it's good. I have lots of stories I could tell. I think that it's when I first got here, I found it really difficult at times, that I would walk around in my collar in the old city, and people wouldn't know what I was, and they would say really strange things to me. For example, people don't know what to call me, and so they sometimes, most of the time, call me sister, because they think I'm a nun, which is fine, except that I'm not.
Right.
And it becomes a little weird. I came here with 2 children, 2 teenage boys, and so that confused people. If they saw me and they thought I was a nun, but then they saw me with 2 boys and they thought, what's that about? It's been good. It's been a challenge to try to kind of figure out my identity in this place. And I think in a good way. I think it's helped me to figure out who I am, not only as a clergy person, but as a Christian in this place, because I'm a minority in so many different ways here.
Yeah, talk about some of those ways in which you're a minority in that context, because really, unless you've been there, and even I don't have as good of a sense having been there for a while. But what kinds of minorities are there? What's it like?
Well, so it's interesting, because I think as Christians we think about Jerusalem as being the city of Jesus, right? We think this is the place where Jesus was crucified and resurrected, but of course, this is a place that is multi-religious. This is a holy place for Jews and Christians and Muslims. And currently, today, Christians only make up about 1.5% of the population in all of Israel and Palestine. So maybe a little bit more in Jerusalem itself, because this is the most religious city in the country. And a lot of religious folks are based here. And of course, we have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is where we believe Jesus was crucified and resurrected. So as a Christian, just in that sense, I and all other Christians here are minorities. And then, of course, as a woman in ministry, I'm a minority, because there aren't, well, I can count on one hand the number of female clergy people in the whole country.
Oh, wow.
5 people. And then as an American, and so you said, how many ways am I a minority? Oh, and then as a Protestant Christian, because most of the Christians who are here are Orthodox or Catholic, or the third highest population is Syriac Christians, and Protestants are an extreme minority. So those are all the ways in which, just kind of walking around with, as a Christian, with my black clergy shirt and collar and my cross, I'm just sort of an anomaly in the city.
Yeah, I imagine that feels odd at times, to be that much of an anomaly.
Yeah, I mean, at times it feels really weird. I think, I've been here now, this is my 7th year, and so I have a little time here. I've gotten to know people. I don't get as many strange comments, but at the beginning it was a little weird. And I'll tell you a story about the first couple of weeks when I was here in Jerusalem, and I had just arrived. It was the summer of 2014, and this was the time of the Gaza war. And actually, my deployment here as pastor was delayed because of the war. And when I was finally able to come, I felt so excited, and I felt that I was really answering God's call and answering the call of the church to be here. So I was walking along Salahuddin Street, which is the main East Jerusalem business area, and speaking in English to the person with me. And this person walked towards me and heard me speaking English and said, "Are you American?" And I answered, "Yes, I'm American." And this person said, "Oh, well, thank you for killing our babies."
Oh.
Like that. And it had not occurred to me that a person might encounter me as an American as the person who was funding the war that was happening in Gaza. It had not occurred to me. I felt that I was coming here as a Christian, as a person who wanted to help and to work for peace and for justice. And I didn't know that I would be perceived as a white person, as an American, as part of the system that was causing this problem. And that was a really big wake-up call. And I think that was probably the 2nd week that I was here. So that's just, to say there are multiple identities that you inhabit when you go to a new place. And as a missionary, I want to think that I'm here to do good, but I know that I'm also representing systems that don't always do good.
That brings up a really interesting question, particularly in this political moment in the U.S. Around, Breonna Taylor just yesterday, the police folks who were involved in her death were exonerated by a grand jury, and so there are lots of Black Lives Matter rallies in the works, and it's been quite a summer. I mean, I'm sure you've kept up with all of it. It's been a summer here in Winston. We've even had our own local incidents. And I think one of the questions that we're all wrestling with, those of us who are white, who are fairly privileged here in Winston-Salem, one of the things we're all wrestling with is, how do we flip that script, right? Because we actually, we both see how we're complicit with these systems, and how we live off of them, right?
What I want to say is, I'm thinking back to that moment where my initial reaction at that moment was defensiveness, because I wanted to say, well, yeah, but I'm here. Yes, I know that Americans are funding this and have played a part in this war and providing the weapons for this, but I'm here. Look at me. You know, I'm the good one, and I'm here. And I think that's natural that happens, that we get defensive. At the same time, I had to step back and listen. And that's what I've been trying to do for the last 7 years, is to really listen to the people here and to say, okay, what's your experience? What have you been going through? As I listen and as I learn and as I show my willingness to step away from my privilege. I can never step away from my privilege always, right? But I mean, it's there. It's in me and in the system.
Right.
But when I show my willingness to try to understand and to reflect, self-reflect, then I hear more stories. I'll tell you, for example, one summer, it was really, really hot here. It's always hot here, but it was really, really hot. And I was walking to my church. I was wearing my black, all my clergy wear. And I sat down and said, oh, it took me 20 minutes to walk here, and I'm so sweaty and I can't believe it. And I don't have air conditioning in my office, and blah, 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 blah. And the receptionist at the front desk looked at me and said, well, can I tell you about my commute? Keep in mind, this was 2 years into my time here.
Okay.
I've known this person for 2 years. And finally, he told me, he said, it takes me 2 hours to get to work. And he worked 8 miles from the church. It takes him 2 hours because of the checkpoints, because he's Palestinian and has to go through multiple checkpoints and prove his identity and stand in line with 8,000 other men to get into work, and has to ride on segregated buses and has to undergo many indignities. And I did not know that. I did not know the extent of that until 2 years in. And it was only because I was willing, I believe, because I showed him that I was a trustworthy person and that I was willing to hear. And so I think in this given moment where I think so many white Americans and we'll say white Christians are grappling with, what does it mean to be white, and what does it mean to be an American, and what can we do? I really think we need to just listen at certain points. And it's not a short-term thing. It's a long haul journey. Yeah. We're not going to get through this. We're not going to understand this, what's been happening in our country for hundreds of years, in a couple of weeks.
Right. Or even a couple of years.
Or a couple of years.
As your story just illustrates, right?
Right. I mean, I didn't hear. This is a person that I saw every single morning in my church office, and it took 2 years for this person to really share his experience here. So I think we speaking as a white person in America, a white American person, we just need to realize it's going to take a long time, and to not be upset when we hear from our neighbors a lot of pain and hurt. And just because we post the right thing on Facebook or say the right thing, it doesn't mean we fixed it.
That's right. Tell us a little bit about the justice contexts in Israel right now. I mean, I think most of us know that the politics are a flashpoint. Most of us know that things have gotten worse over the last 4 years for Palestinians in that area of the world. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in the political moment.
So it's interesting to talk about this right now because, of course, on one level, COVID has taken over a lot of the conversation, and people aren't really talking about justice issues in other ways because of COVID, because we're just dealing with the crisis. And I think that's what's happening in so many parts of the world. But just prior to COVID, we were dealing with the fact that there was a talk of annexing the West Bank here, and Israel deciding that, okay, all of this, all of the West Bank, all of the parts that are considered by international law to be illegally settled, these are just going to be ours. And that was what we were really focused on, was saying, this is a really big, big problem, because we have for decades said that we, and I say we, the ELCA has been advocating for a two-state solution alongside the ELCJHL. And a two-state solution means a sovereign Israel and a sovereign Palestine living side by side with agreed upon borders, and a shared Jerusalem, a Jerusalem that would be a city shared by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And that is the plan that's been pushed forward, and really by the local church. And I would say that as the ELCA, we always try to follow what the local congregations are saying. We don't come in and say, this is what you should do, but we're listening and saying, and this is what they say they want. And so to say that the West Bank is going to be annexed, what that means is it would be the death of the two-state solution, because there's no possibility, if these settlements that are in the West Bank become Israel, there's no way to have a contiguous Palestinian state. So that was really where we were all focused before COVID happened. And to be honest, that's kind of fallen away, and we're just trying to survive day to day. So I would say things on the ground are not much different than they were in November or December or January regarding politics.
Tell me about your receptionist. Is your receptionist still able to come to work given the COVID restrictions?
Yeah, well, the West Bank has had different COVID restrictions, and so they closed on March 5th, and at that time, I mean, it was several months then where the entire West Bank was closed. And the reason for that was that COVID first came here through tourists, actually Christian pilgrims who came, and they, so it was one hotel in Bethlehem that became quarantine, and that's how the virus came to the country.
What part of the city are you in?
So, what part of the city? Actually, I live just on the seam between East and West Jerusalem. So if you can imagine the main road that goes between East and West, I'm actually on the west side, but barely, and I'm living in a Palestinian neighborhood. And my landlady would say that I live in Sheikh Jarrah.
Okay.
If that makes sense to you, but people they can't ever quite picture where we are, because we're surrounded by Ramat Eshkol, which is a Jewish neighborhood, which was actually the first Jewish settlement in the city of Jerusalem in 1967.
Oh, wow.
So, and to get to my house, I wish I could show you all. To get to my house, you have to cross the light rail, drive across the light rail tracks, drive down a sidewalk, and into my alley, which is a very Jerusalem thing. It's just very weird.
Wow. Yeah. No, I mean, I lived right on Saladin, right at the Albright Institute, and remember seeing those sidewalk streets.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, the summer that I was in Jerusalem, I also lived on Kibbutz Kfar Tzod, which was one of the kibbutzim that was part of the '67 war.
Okay.
So I remember actually a couple of residents telling us about the '67 war and thinking, wow, this is a story that we don't hear in justice circles in the US, for sure.
Exactly. We don't hear about it. And in fact, just behind my house is a street called 1967 Street.
Oh, wow.
That's interesting. And also our former bishop, who's now retired, he was 17 years old in 1967 and has a lot of stories to tell about what that was like for him, that during the 6-Day War, he was hiding out in the basement of the church that his family went to. And so you have all of these stories about what that was like at that time. It was a big change.
Big piece. Yeah.
And people are, and to think that people are still living today that went through that.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know if I ever told you, but Bishop Yunan was one of the bishops who ordained me, actually.
Really? No, I didn't know that.
the synod that I was in the New England Synod when I was ordained, and
Yes.
ELCJHL was our partner synod, and so he was there for the synod assembly. And I do want to come back to some of the questions about women, but I'm sort of really curious about the setting in Jerusalem in particular. One of the things that I think most of us think about, we kind of romanticize the old city, and a lot of times I would walk through and hear pilgrims or tourists, and there's a difference between the two also, sort of exclaiming, "Oh, I can't believe it looked like this when Jesus was here." And I kept thinking, well, but those people are alive right now and living their lives right now. They're not living a Jesus life. So I'm curious, what's the dynamic like living in a place where people come for pilgrimage and there's all kinds of expectations about what they're going to find?
That's such a good question, because I've had many people that have come and been really, really disappointed. I think people come, they save up money to come on this really amazing trip, and they do get to see amazing things. And then they come to where they want to walk in the footsteps where Jesus walked, but they didn't know about the current reality. They didn't know about what people are going through today. And I've had more than one situation where a pilgrim has come to my church office and been in tears and saying, I had no idea that this is what was happening here. And they really have a crisis of faith. It's saying, I thought that the place where Jesus was would be this city of peace, and it's not a city of peace. It's a city of conflict, and I think it can be really a challenge. And for me, the challenge is trying to figure out how to preach the gospel and preach good news in the midst of this. And the longer I'm here, the more I remember that every city is holy, not just Jerusalem, and every land is both holy and unholy. I mean, injustice happens everywhere because humans are everywhere, and we are broken people. And so Jerusalem is no different. And I think when people come here and expect to see something amazingly holy, that's when they get disturbed and have a problem. So what I just tell people is, when you come to this place, whatever you were expecting, probably you're going to be disturbed when you leave. You're probably going to be stirred up. But hopefully what you see is that God is present here in the midst of all of this, in the midst of this injustice, in the midst of the problems that are happening. Still, God is here. Christ is present. And to take that back to whatever city you're from, wherever you are, and to remember that also in the midst of this situation in the U.S., I know it's difficult. I haven't been to the U.S. recently, but I watch what's been going on, and I know that it's really hard right now. It's really hard to think that good things are going to come out of this. But we, of course, know that good things are going to come out of it, because Good Friday was not the end of the story. We are people that believe in resurrection and a new life. And I think that's where, if you come to Jerusalem, hopefully that's what you can at least experience, is that it's not the end. It's not the end of the story.
Yeah, I love that. So one of the questions that I've asked every one of our folks is this question of, what have you been able to do because you're a woman in ministry? We talk a lot about the things, the oddities and the strangenesses that happen as women in ministry. And, all of us have stories, if lots of stories. But what have you found you've been able to do because you're a woman in ministry?
I'm really glad you asked that. I actually want to answer that with a story, because I am a preacher and a storyteller, and that's what I like to do. In 2015, it was my turn to preach for Christmas Eve in Bethlehem. And I knew for an entire year that this was going to happen, because we are a multilingual congregation or church. So we have German, Arabic, English, and Danish congregations. And we have a chart actually that goes back 20 years and goes forward 20 years that shows who gets to preach in what language, who gets to preside for all of our joint services. And I don't know who made it, but clearly this is one of the things that makes peace possible within our church. So I knew that that I was going to be it was going to be an English sermon, Christmas 2015. I knew it for an entire year or more. And so you believe me, for an entire year, I worked on that sermon. I thought, this is my chance. I'm preaching Christmas Eve in Bethlehem. This is going to be amazing. And on the 23rd of December, I read the sermon that I had written for an entire year. And I thought, this is terrible. This is a terrible sermon. This was like, you know, when you just research it to death. I just had made, it didn't sound like a sermon. It had no life to it. It didn't sound like me. And I was very upset and depressed about it. And I went to bed on the 23rd of December, and I woke up and I suddenly knew what I needed to preach. And because I remembered in the night that this is a sermon, this is a night, this story is about birth. This is about a woman giving birth. And here I am, a woman who has given birth, and I'm a woman who has helped other women give birth, because as I said before, I was a doula and a student midwife, and I've seen many babies being born and helped families through that. And I thought, for goodness sake, why am I not talking about that in my chance to preach? And so I woke up early on Christmas Eve morning and I rewrote the entire sermon. And I told the story of a childbirth educator that I knew who couldn't find a place to teach her classes. And so she rented space in a nursing home. And one day, this elderly woman was sitting in the back of the childbirth class, and she stood up in the middle of the childbirth class and said, "Let me tell you about having babies." And she told the stories of the births of her children and said, she couldn't remember what she had for breakfast that morning, but she could remember the births of her children. And I preached about Luke 2:19, where it says, "And Mary treasured all these things and pondered them in her heart." And saying that this moment, Mary remembered and treasured them. And also we, on Christmas Eve, are witnesses to this birth, and we treasure them and ponder them through our lives. And, you know, I was really scared to do it, I have to say, because I was on a stage at this church with all men. I was the only woman there, and I was preaching about a very feminine thing, and I didn't know how it would go. But when you ask what could I do because I was a woman, that's something that no one else on that stage could have done, could have preached it in that way. And I felt very proud of it. I'll say that 3 years later, it was my turn to preach again. And I preached from the perspective of Mary's midwife, who doesn't show up in the scriptures, but is present in a lot of tradition. So I preached about Salome, who helped Mary give birth. And afterwards, we were shaking hands with the parishioners, the folks that came. And my fellow pastor leaned over and said, "Are you going to preach on this woman stuff every time you preach?" And I said, "Yep, every 3 years, one day every 3 years, like clockwork, whether you like it or not."
Right, because this man stuff hasn't been preached on at all.
Exactly. Yeah, you can handle it once every 3 years, I think. It'll be fine.
Right. Oh my goodness, this woman stuff. Wow, that sounds like a beautiful sermon. That sounds, yeah, wow. Sorry, I'm just letting that soak in for a second.
I know, I'm trying to think when my next turn is. I think I have another year and a half or so. I probably should start thinking now about
How did parishioners respond to that?
Well, I mean, actually, I had a lot of good comments about it. I think some people were uncomfortable. I think we're not used to reading that story from Mary's perspective or through a woman's perspective, you know, and anytime we're made to see things from someone else's point of view, it's a little bit difficult. I had one member, a woman, who found it really difficult because she had recently lost a pregnancy, and she said to me, until I heard your sermon, I hadn't thought about Christmas as being about birth. And I
Oh,
thought that's interesting also, she, as a woman,
yeah.
hadn't thought about it. And so it makes me think how we tell these stories and what do they mean to us? How is it that we can go into the Church of the Nativity, which is just down the street from where I was preaching, and it's all men who are in control of the church? And how is it that there's nothing about that space that feels feminine
Mhm.
for thousands of years? And that feels comfortable to us. That's the way it is. So I'm not trying to say that it's only about women. The story is not only about the women, but the women in that story have often been ignored. And the main woman of that story, the mother of Jesus, has often been ignored.
Yeah, I think particularly her experience, right? I mean, we celebrate her obedience and her ascent and her, sort of sense of justice, but we don't always celebrate her experience, and
Yeah,
especially as Protestants. I mean, especially as Protestants.
yeah, yeah, because I think we have such baggage around the way Mary has been revered by other traditions. So then we just kind of chuck her out completely, and that's sad because it is leaving out so many experiences. I'm aware that being a mother is not every woman's experience.
Hmm.
Not every woman is a mother and or is pregnant or wants to be. Many women do want to be and cannot. I mean, so this is not a universal experience, but it is a story that's there that doesn't get told. It's in the text that, I mean, it does get told. I mean, this is the thing that's frustrating, right? It
Hmm.
is the story. The story is a woman had a baby.
Hmm.
A woman had a baby, and we don't think about that. We leave that part out. We don't talk about her. So that's, to me, that's really strange. But
Yeah, I think so often women get subsumed into that role of mother, and it is some women's roles. It is some women's vocation, um,
yes, I think
but
this
not
goes back
everybody's.
to kind of this overarching discussion of what it means to be a woman in ministry, because I think that as a woman in ministry, sometimes I try to gloss over the fact that I'm a woman and I want to fit in with all the men, and I have to do that a lot. I wear the same shirt, and I will say that often here we go, well, here's the story. We go to visit the patriarchs every Christmas and Easter, and we have multiple Christmases and Easters here. We have Orthodox
Mhm.
Christmas, and
Right.
and we have Armenian Christmas, and we have Western Christmas, and then we have several Christmases and several Easters. We go and visit the different churches to give official Easter and Christmas greetings, and I'm often the only woman in the room.
Mm.
And at the beginning, I tried very hard to fit in, and I thought, okay, I'm going to be as respectful as I can, and maybe no one will notice that I'm a woman. And the reality is that's not going to happen. I mean, there's nothing I can do. There's no outfit I can put on where I am going to look like the men.
Right.
I am who I am. And I think that when I was telling the story about deciding how to preach, I think it's about owning who I am and my experience in the world. I am a mother. I have given birth, and this is how I experience the world. And I'm a pastor, called to do this work. And I think that that's who God wants me to be. And I think that's who God wants all of us to be, is to be who we are, embody who we are, and from that place share the good news. And that's it's not easy. It's not easy when I don't know what it's like to be in a Black body. I don't know what it's like to be in an Indigenous body. This is what I know, and I'm called to be this person the
Mhm.
best that I and preach the best that I can. So I mean, it's an ongoing project.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful though. How has ministry changed for women since you were first ordained? And I realize that it's only been, a decade or a little more. Um, but how has it changed? or has it?
Wow, that's a really interesting question, because I've spent the majority of my time ordained in a different country, and in a place where we don't have any ordained women yet in this church. So that's different. But I would say I'm really lucky that I grew up knowing women pastors. So this is the 50th anniversary year, right? We know that for women being ordained. And I grew up in actually a congregational church, and I had a woman pastor for as long as I can remember. I was very lucky in that way. And then in high school and college, I had a woman pastor as well. On the other hand, even though I've been ordained just 11 years now this year, I was the first woman pastor in my first call 11 years ago, and then I was the first woman senior pastor in my second call, and then the first woman here to serve solo. So even though it's been 50 years, I'm still the first in all of these places. And the good news is that I've been watching, the bishop elections in this last summer, and I see there are so many women in the ELCA being elected as bishop. That's a great sign. I think people are getting used to the idea. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I just feel like it's getting better, but it's such a long process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you've hit it on the nose. What's so interesting about this conversation is that, neither of us have been ordained for that long in the grand scheme of things, and especially in Jerusalem time. And yet, we both have our stories of firsts, and we're continuing to be firsts. But here's my last question. What do you hope for? What do you hope for the ELCA, the ELCJHL?
Oh, it's funny, you added those other words, because the first thing you said, what do you hope for? And my first thought was, I hope for a vaccine. Okay. The first thing that I hope for is a vaccine, and for us to have a new way forward as a world, as a globe. But for the ELCA and ELCJHL, I hope for this place and for the people that I serve and the company. I hope for justice. I hope that this occupation doesn't last for another 60 years. I think the longer I'm here, the more confusing the situation is for me, but also the clearer it is that it just cannot continue this way. This is not right. It's not right for anyone here. It takes so much time and energy and money from every side. Israelis and Palestinians are both bound to this occupation, and both are imprisoned by this situation, and none of them can live free until it's done, until there's justice. And so I don't know what it looks like, and I know people will ask me that a lot when groups come. They'll say, well, what does the peace look like? And I say, I don't know. What I know is that this is not it, and we want to see something new. So I hope for that. And I think for the ELCA, I think we're in this time of reimagining who we are as Christians in the world. We are the widest denomination in the US, and we need to grapple with that and think about, what does that mean for us? And if we are the widest church, then maybe we have the biggest responsibility. Maybe we, and also, instead of thinking of it that way, maybe we could make the biggest difference. If we did something really bold and loving as the widest church in the US, maybe we could make the biggest impact. I don't know what that looks like, but just to think, instead of thinking of it as something to be ashamed of, maybe this is the thing that we grab onto and take with us into the future. Do something big. So that's what I have to say. I don't know. But again, I'm going to go back to my first answer. I hope for a vaccine. I want to be able to come to the US and visit my family, and I want to be able to see my children who are in Europe, and I haven't seen them for almost a year. I hope for a change in our world.
Well, I hope for that too. Well, thank you so much, Pastor Ballenger. We're grateful for your time and for your willingness to participate with us.